A single kiss in a Manhattan rainstorm changed everything. But seconds later, a car bomb murdered his parents and turned him into New York's youngest mafia king. 5 years of silence, 5 years of survival, 5 years of pretending she never existed. Now Amara Bennett stands in the marble foyer of his fortress, staring at the man who vanished without explanation, and realizes the broken boy she loved has become the monster everyone fears. But when bullets shatter their reunion and betrayal comes from inside his own blood, staying alive means trusting the one person who already destroyed her once. Like this video, comment your city so I can see how far this story travels, and follow me to the end. Rain hammered the asphalt behind Club Electra like God himself had a grudge against Manhattan. Nikolai Soren Volkov pushed through the steel exit door into the alley, letting the bass-heavy music fade behind him as cold water soaked through his $2,000 suit jacket within seconds. He didn't care. The suffocating crowd inside, politicians shaking hands with drug lords, socialites pretending not to notice the blood money funding their champagne, had become unbearable. 22 years old, and he already felt ancient. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the flame dancing in the downpour before catching. Nicotine flooded his lungs. Better. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, the fourth time in 10 minutes. His father. Always his father. Dmitry Volkov didn't make requests. He issued commands, and lately those commands had begun to sound like preparations for a transfer of power Nikolai wasn't ready to inherit. You've got to be kidding me. The voice came from his left, sharp and frustrated and completely out of place in this particular back alley where normal people didn't wander. Nikolai turned, cigarette dangling from his lips, and saw her. A young woman stood beneath the broken fire escape, one hand braced against the wet brick wall, the other holding a snapped high heel like evidence in a crime scene. Her black dress clung to her curves, soaked through, and her natural curls had gone wild in the humidity, framing a face that made Nikolai forget to breathe for a moment. Dark skin glistening with rainwater, eyes that sparked with irritation rather than fear. She didn't recognize him. That alone was remarkable. Bad night? Nikolai asked, because he was apparently still capable of basic human interaction when caught off guard. She looked up, noticed him for the first time, and something shifted in her expression. Not recognition, but assessment. She was reading him the way he'd been trained to read people, cataloging details, calculating threat levels. You could say that, she muttered, examining the destroyed shoe. My roommate ditched me for some Wall Street douchebag. My phone died, and now my favorite heels are officially casualties of war. She glanced at him again. You got a cigarette? Nikolai almost smiled. Almost. He pulled the pack from his jacket and crossed the alley, water streaming down his face. Up close she was even more striking, the kind of beautiful that didn't need validation, that existed independently of male attention or approval. He offered her the cigarette. She took it, and when he flicked the lighter, she leaned in close enough that he caught the scent of vanilla and rain. Thanks. She exhaled smoke, eyes narrowing as she studied him more carefully now. You look miserable. Perceptive. Nursing student, she said, as if that explained everything. We're trained to spot people who are dying inside. A pause. I'm Amara. Nikolai. Her eyebrow lifted. Russian? Something like that. They stood there in the rain, two strangers sharing cigarettes in a trash-lined alley behind one of Manhattan's most exclusive nightclubs, and Nikolai felt something crack open inside his chest. Something he'd kept carefully locked away since childhood. She wasn't impressed by him. She wasn't afraid. She was just present. Real. So what's your story? Amara asked, blowing smoke toward the night sky. Rich kid slumming it in the alley? Or did someone important make you want to escape too? Both, Nikolai admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. My father wants me to be something I'm not sure I can become. Let me guess. The family business? She said it lightly, teasing, with no idea how accurate she'd landed. You could say that. Sounds awful. Amara dropped the cigarette butt, crushing it beneath her remaining heel. She wobbled slightly, cursed under her breath, and Nikolai reached out instinctively to steady her. His hand found her waist. She didn't pull away. Their eyes met, and the air between them shifted into something electric and dangerous. Rain poured down. Music thumped from inside the club. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, and none of it mattered because Amara was looking at him like he was just a man. Not an heir, not a weapon, not a legacy wrapped in expensive fabric. Just Nikolai. "This is probably a terrible idea," she whispered. Probably. She kissed him first. Or maybe he kissed her. Later, Nikolai wouldn't be able to remember who moved first, only that her mouth tasted like cigarettes and rain and freedom. And for exactly 10 seconds, he forgot every single burden his last name carried. Her fingers curled into his wet hair. His hands tightened on her waist. The world narrowed to just this, just her, just the possibility that life could be something other than duty and violence and blood. Then his phone rang. The sound cut through everything like a blade. Nikolai broke the kiss, breathing hard, his forehead pressed against Amara's as reality came crashing back. She smiled, dazed and beautiful, her thumb brushing his jaw. "You should probably get that," she murmured. He should have ignored it, should have thrown the phone into a puddle and stayed in this perfect moment where he was nobody's son and nobody's soldier. But years of conditioning won out. Nikolai pulled the phone from his jacket, water dripping from the screen, and saw his uncle's name flashing. "I have to take this," he said, his voice rough. "Don't leave, please." Amara nodded, still catching her breath, and Nikolai stepped away, swiping to answer. "Maxime, this better be..." "Nikolai?" His uncle's voice was strange, tight, wrong. "Where are you?" "Outside Club Electra. Why?" Silence on the other end, filled with something that made Nikolai's blood turn cold. Background noise, shouting, sirens, chaos. "Uncle Maxime, what's happening? You need to come home right now." Maxime's voice cracked. "There's been an attack, a car bomb. Your parents..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The phone slipped from Nikolai's hand, clattering onto the wet pavement. Sound distorted. Time slowed. He stared at the glowing screen, his uncle's voice still calling his name from the speaker, but the words had stopped making sense. Car bomb. Parents. Attack. His mother's laugh. His father's iron handshake. The way they'd looked at dinner last week, talking about the future, about legacy, about passing the Volkov Empire to the next generation when the time was right. The time wasn't supposed to be right for decades. Nikolai bent mechanically, retrieving the phone, his hands steady even though his entire world had just detonated. Training took over, the part of him bred for crisis management, for violence, for survival. That part surged forward and shoved everything else aside. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice empty of emotion. "Secure the compound. Lock down all family assets. Contact Dimitri's lawyer and activate the emergency protocols. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call. Turned around. Amara stood exactly where he'd left her, concern written across her face, one hand pressed to her heart. "Nikolai? What happened? You look... I have to go." The words came out flat, dead. "Are you okay? Was it bad news?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw everything he would never be able to have. Safety. Normalcy. A life where kisses in the rain didn't end with funerals. She was studying nursing. She had roommates who ditched her for Wall Street guys. She existed in a world where broken heels constituted a crisis, and he was about to inherit an empire built on blood. If he stayed, if he let this continue, if he allowed himself to pull her into his orbit, she would die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually someone would use her against him. Someone would hurt her to hurt him. Someone would put a bullet in her head just to prove they could. He'd just lost his parents to a car bomb. The message was clear. No one close to the Volkov family was safe. "Nikolai?" Amar's voice softened. She stepped closer, reaching for him. "Talk to me. Whatever it is..." "This was a mistake," he said, forcing ice into his voice. "I have to go. Forget this happened." Her hand froze in midair. "What?" "You don't belong in my world." He turned away before he could see the hurt bloom across her face, before his resolve could crack. "Go home, Amara." He walked toward the street where his driver would be waiting, each step feeling like he was dragging chains. Behind him, he heard her call his name once, just once. He didn't turn around. By the time he reached the black Mercedes idling at the curb, his phone was flooded with messages. Family members, associates, soldiers, everyone scrambling to understand what had happened, who was responsible, what came next. Nikolai slid into the back seat, and his driver, Victor, a man who'd worked for his father for 30 years, met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "I'm sorry, Nikolai," Victor said quietly. "Your father was a great man." "Drive," Nikolai replied. "And from now on, you call me Mr. Volkov." The old man's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." The car pulled into traffic, and Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows. Nikolai watched the city lights streak by, his reflection ghostly in the glass, and felt the last pieces of the boy he'd been dying in real time. His phone buzzed again, and again, and again. He answered each call with mechanical efficiency, issuing orders, gathering information, constructing the framework of response. Yes, secure the compounds. Yes, sweep for additional threats. Yes, call the council for an emergency meeting. No, don't contact the police. This was family business. The Volkov estate sat 40 minutes outside the city, a sprawling compound protected by gates, guards, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small country. By the time the Mercedes pulled through the main entrance, Nikolai had already made 30 decisions that would shape the next decade of his life. The circular driveway was chaos, black SUVs everywhere, armed men moving with purpose. Maxim Orlov stood on the front steps, his usually immaculate suit jacket wrinkled, his face drawn. When he saw Nikolai emerge from the car, something flickered across his expression, relief, or maybe calculation. "Tell me everything," Nikolai said, climbing the steps. Maxim fell into step beside him, speaking rapidly. They were leaving dinner at Rossini's. The bomb was under the car, remote detonated, professional work. Antonov is already investigating, but we're dealing with someone skilled. Survivors. Both drivers died instantly. Your mother? Maxim's voice faltered. She didn't suffer. Your father lasted 10 minutes. He asked for you. Nikolai stopped walking. The massive front doors of the estate loomed before him, and beyond them lay a life he'd never wanted. But want had stopped being relevant the moment his parents' car exploded. What were his last words? Maxim hesitated, then placed a hand on Nikolai's shoulder, a gesture that would have been comforting from anyone else. He said, "Tell Nikolai the empire is his now. Tell him to be stronger than I was." Stronger. Always stronger. Never soft. Never weak. Never human. Never falling in love with nursing students in rain-soaked alleys. Nikolai pushed through the doors into the marble foyer. The house was full of people, family, associates, soldiers, all of them turning to look at him with expressions ranging from grief to opportunism. They were already calculating, already wondering if the 22-year-old heir had what it took to hold this empire together. He would show them. Over the next 72 hours, Nikolai Soren Volkov transformed. He attended his parents' funeral in a black suit that cost more than most people's cars, standing stone-faced while hundreds of mourners filed past the closed caskets. He met with the council of underbosses and made it clear that any attempt to exploit the power vacuum would be met with overwhelming force. He ordered audits of every business, legal and otherwise. He restructured security protocols. He moved into his father's study and sat behind the massive oak desk where 3 generations of Volkov men had ruled, and he never once allowed himself to think about Amara. Maxim became his constant shadow, advising, guiding, shaping the young heir into something approximating his father's legacy. "You're doing well," his uncle would say. Dmitri would be proud, but at night, alone in the study with a glass of vodka and the weight of an empire crushing down on his shoulders, Nikolai would remember the taste of rain and cigarettes, the feeling of her fingers in his hair, the 10 seconds of freedom before everything burned. He never looked for her, never tried to contact her, never even spoke her name aloud. Because men like him didn't get to keep the things they loved, they only destroyed them. Okay. 5 years later, the Hamptons' summer heat pressed down like a physical weight. Amara Bennett stood outside the gates of the Volkov estate, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. The text message on her phone felt like it had been written in another language, even though the words were simple enough. "Amara, it's Vivian. I'm dying. Please come. I need you. Vivienne Volkov had been Amara's best friend since undergrad, the wild, brilliant girl who'd introduced Amara to modern art and expensive wine and the kind of reckless adventures that made life worth living. They drifted apart after graduation, their lives moving in different directions, but they'd never stopped caring about each other. And now Vivienne was dying. The guard at the gate approached her car, his face professionally neutral, a weapon visible beneath his suit jacket. Name and purpose. Amara Bennett, I'm here to see Vivienne Volkov. He spoke into his radio, waited for confirmation, then nodded. Drive straight to the main house. Someone will meet you. The gates swung open with mechanical precision, and Amara's ancient Honda Civic coughed its way up the immaculate driveway. The estate sprawled across what had to be 50 acres. Manicured lawns, stone fountains, gardens that belonged in magazines. Old money, serious money. The kind of wealth that bought silence and loyalty and whatever else it needed. Vivienne had always been rich, but Amara hadn't understood the scale until now. She parked in front of the main house, a mansion that looked like it had been imported from Europe, all marble columns and arched windows, and barely had time to kill the engine before the front doors opened. A woman in her 50s emerged, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, wearing what Amara recognized as a private nurse's uniform. Professional, competent, exhausted. Miss Bennett? Yes, I'm Helen. Miss Volkov is resting upstairs, but she asked me to find you the moment you arrived. Helen's expression softened slightly. She's been asking for you every day this week. Guilt twisted in Amara's stomach. She should have visited sooner, should have called more often, should have been a better friend. Take me to her. Helen led her inside, and Amara's breath caught. The foyer was massive, 2-story ceiling, crystal chandelier, floor so polished she could see her reflection. Artwork that probably cost more than her student loans covered the walls. Everything screamed power and control and permanence. They climbed a sweeping staircase to the second floor, passing more guards stationed at strategic points. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. She's been very ill, Helen said quietly as they walked down a long hallway. The cancer spread faster than the doctors anticipated. We're keeping her comfortable, but she trailed off, the implication clear. How long? Weeks, maybe less. They stopped outside a door, and Helen knocked gently before pushing it open. Miss Volkov? Your friend is here. The room beyond was flooded with afternoon sunlight, decorated in soft creams and blues that felt nothing like the cold marble downstairs. And there, propped up on pillows in a massive canopy bed, looking impossibly fragile, was Vivienne. She'd always been thin, but now she looked breakable. Her skin had gone translucent, her cheekbones too sharp. But her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that had gotten them into and out of 100 adventures, those were still the same. Amara, she breathed, and her whole face transformed with joy. Amara crossed the room in 3 strides and carefully, so carefully, gathered her friend into a hug. Vivienne felt like paper and bird bones, but her grip was surprisingly strong. I'm so glad you came, Vivienne whispered. I was worried you wouldn't. Of course I came, you idiot! Amara pulled back, swiping at her eyes. You think a little thing like terminal cancer was going to keep me away? Vivienne laughed, then winced, pressing a hand to her side. Still making inappropriate jokes. I missed you? They talked for an hour, carefully skirting around the elephant in the room, catching up on 5 years of missed connection. Vivienne had gotten married young to a man named Yvonne, had a daughter, then lost Ivan in some kind of accident 2 years ago. Now she was dying, and all she wanted was for her daughter Sophia to be cared for by people who loved her. That's why I asked you here, Vivienne admitted, her voice growing tired. Sophia needs someone who isn't part of this world. Someone normal. Someone who remembers that life can be good and simple and not always about this. She gestured vaguely at the opulent room. Viv, I'm a hospice nurse. I can take a leave, stay here with you until... I know, and I need that. But I also need you to promise me something. Vivienne's hand found Amara's, squeezing tight. Promise me you'll look after Sophia when I'm gone. Nikolai loves her, but he's so busy, and she needs... The name hit Amara like a physical blow. Nikolai. Her vision blurred at the edges. The room tilted. Did you just say Nikolai? Vivian blinked, confusion crossing her face. Yes, my brother. Nikolai Volkov. He's your brother. The words came out strangled. Vivian, your last name is Volkov. You told me you were Vivian Novak in college. Understanding dawned slowly across Vivian's face, followed by horror. Oh God. Amara, I used my mother's maiden name at school because I wanted a normal life, and I never thought to explain. And you never asked about my family, and… She stopped, really looking at Amara now. Wait, why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Do you know Nikolai? The door opened. Amara turned and 5 years collapsed into nothing. Nikolai Soren Volkov stood in the doorway, and he was nothing like the broken boy from the alley. This man wore violence like a second skin. His suit was perfectly tailored, black and severe. His dark hair was shorter now, styled with precision. The haunted look in his eyes had hardened into something cold and calculating and utterly merciless. But when he saw Amara, everything stopped. His face went completely blank. Not surprised, but erased, like someone had wiped away every emotion he possessed. They stared at each other across Vivian's bedroom, the past roaring up between them like a wildfire. And Amara felt every single thing she'd buried for 5 years come screaming back to life. The kiss. The rain. The way he'd looked at her like she was salvation. The way he'd walked away without a single word of explanation. Nikolai? Vivian's voice was small, uncertain. Do you two know each other? He recovered first, his expression sliding back into neutral territory, but Amara saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. We met once, he said, his voice flat and controlled. A long time ago. We met once, Amara repeated, and she heard the bitterness in her own voice, the anger she'd thought she'd processed years ago rising fresh and sharp. That's one way to put it. Vivian looked between them, realization dawning. Oh no, oh God, you're the girl from that night, the one he… She stopped, pressing her fingers to her mouth. What? Amara demanded. The one he what? But Nikolai was already backing out of the room, his control fracturing just enough that she caught a glimpse of something raw beneath it. I'll come back later, Viv, when your friend is settled in. He was gone before Amara could move, the door clicking shut with devastating finality. Vivian grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. Amara, listen to me. Whatever happened between you two, whatever he did, there's more to the story, so much more. And if you're going to be here, if you're going to stay, you need to understand that my brother isn't the villain you think he is. But all Amara could hear was the rain. All she could feel was the ghost of his hands on her waist, his mouth on hers, and the hollow ache of 5 years spent wondering what she'd done wrong. She'd come here to care for her dying friend. She hadn't known she'd be walking straight back into the heart of the man who destroyed her. And somewhere in the marble halls below, Nikolai Soren Volkov stood alone in his father's study, staring at a cocktail napkin preserved behind glass, the one with Amara's phone number scrawled across it in pen, faded but still legible after 5 years. The number he'd never called, the promise he'd never kept, the future he'd killed with his own hands the night his parents died. A small voice spoke from the doorway. Papa? Why do you look sad? Nikolai turned to see his daughter Sophia standing there in her princess pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her dark eyes too knowing for a 4-year-old. He crossed the room and scooped her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I'm not sad, little star, just tired. Aunt Vivian's friend is here, the pretty lady. Helen says she's going to stay and help. The pretty lady. Of course Sophia would notice. Of course the universe would be this cruel. Yes, Nikolai managed. She's here to help Aunt Vivian feel better. Will she help you feel better too? Out of the mouths of children. Nikolai carried Sophia toward her bedroom, her small arms wrapped around his neck, and felt the walls he'd spent 5 years building start to crack. Because Amara Bennett was here, in his house, under his protection, caring for his dying sister. And this time, he couldn't just walk away. The first 3 days, Amara avoided Nikolai completely. It wasn't hard. The estate was massive enough that 2 people could live entirely separate lives within its walls. And Nikolai seemed just as committed to the avoidance as she was. She caught glimpses of him sometimes. A shadow moving past a doorway, the sound of his voice issuing orders in another room, the smell of his cologne lingering in a hallway. But they never occupied the same space. Amara threw herself into caring for Vivian with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She monitored medications, adjusted pain management protocols, sat beside the bed reading aloud from novels, while her friend drifted in and out of morphine-hazed sleep. Helen, the primary nurse, seemed grateful for the help. The two of them developed an efficient rhythm, trading shifts, comparing notes, doing everything possible to keep Vivian comfortable as her body continued its slow betrayal. But at night, alone in the guest room they'd given her, a space larger than her entire apartment back in the city, decorated in soft grays and whites that probably cost more than her annual salary, Amara couldn't stop her mind from circling back to him. Nikolai Volkov, crime boss, Vivian's brother, the man who'd kissed her in the rain and disappeared like smoke. She'd spent 5 years constructing explanations. Maybe he'd been married. Maybe she'd been a bet, a game, a momentary lapse in judgment for a rich boy slumming it in the alley. Maybe he'd simply forgotten her the moment he walked away. None of those explanations had included this fortress, these guards, this life built on violence and secrecy and blood money. Vivian had tried to explain, her words slurred with medication. That night his parents died. It changed him, Amara. He was never the same after. Whatever happened between you two, whatever you think he did, he was protecting you. But protection was just another word for abandonment when you didn't get a choice in the matter. On the fourth morning, Amara woke to find Vivian sitting up in bed, more alert than she'd been in days, her eyes bright with purpose. You can't keep hiding from him, Vivian said without preamble. This house isn't big enough. Amara set down the breakfast tray she'd been carrying. I'm not hiding. I'm working. You're terrified. Of course I'm terrified. The words came out sharper than intended. Your brother runs a criminal empire, Viv. There are men with guns everywhere. I found a panic room behind a bookshelf yesterday. This isn't normal. Vivian's expression softened. No, it's not. But it's the only life Sophia's ever known. And after I'm gone, Nikolai is all she'll have. She paused, struggling for breath. He's not a monster, Amara. He's just broken in ways that don't heal easily. That's not my problem to fix. I know. Vivian reached for her hand. But you're already fixing it anyway, whether you realize it or not. Sophia won't stop talking about you. And Nikolai, she smiled faintly. He's been walking around like a ghost. You being here is destroying him. Good, Amara thought viciously. Then immediately felt ashamed. Viv, I came here for you, to help you, to be with you, not to psychoanalyze your crime lord brother or play stepmother to his daughter. I know, and I love you for that. Vivian squeezed her hand. But life has a funny way of giving us what we need instead of what we want, and I think maybe you two need each other more than either of you will admit. Before Amara could respond, a small voice interrupted from the doorway. Miss Amara? Papa says breakfast is ready downstairs. Sophia stood there in a yellow sundress, her dark hair pulled into pigtails, looking like a miniature version of someone Amara couldn't quite place. The girl had Nikolai's eyes, that same intense gray, but her features were softer, more open, not yet hardened by whatever trauma turned children into weapons. Amara's heart clenched. She'd been avoiding Sophia too, not because she didn't like the child, but because getting attached to her felt dangerous. This wasn't her life. This wasn't her family. She was here temporarily, a hospice nurse fulfilling a dying woman's request, nothing more. But Sophia was looking at her with such hopeful expectation that refusing felt cruel. Your papa's downstairs? Amara asked carefully. Sophia nodded. He made pancakes. He never makes pancakes. He told Cook he wanted to do it himself. She said this like it was the most shocking development in recorded history. Vivian laughed softly from the bed. Go. Eat his pancakes. Try not to kill each other. Amara wanted to refuse, wanted to make an excuse, claim she wasn't hungry, retreat back into the safe distance she'd maintained, but Sophia had already grabbed her hand, tugging insistently, and Vivian was watching with an expression that said, Please, just try. Fine, Amara muttered. But if he poisons me, I'm haunting both of you. The dining room was ridiculous, all dark wood and crystal, with a table that could seat 20 easily. Nikolai stood at the far end near the windows, sunlight cutting across his shoulders, still wearing dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, jaw tight with tension. When Sophia dragged Amara into the room, he turned and their eyes met for the first time since that initial confrontation in Vivian's bedroom. The air went electric. Sophia seemed oblivious, skipping to her usual seat and climbing into the chair with practiced ease. "Papa made pancakes," she announced proudly, "like Mama used to make." Something flickered across Nikolai's face, grief, quickly buried. "Not quite like your mama made them, little star, but close." He'd set 3 places. The informality of it felt strange in this formal space, like he was playing at normalcy in a house built for violence. Amara sat down stiffly, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. Nikolai served the pancakes in silence, perfect golden circles topped with strawberries and powdered sugar. Sophia dug in immediately, syrup everywhere, chattering about something Helen had read to her the night before. Nikolai watched his daughter with an expression so soft it made Amara's chest hurt. Then his eyes shifted to her, and the softness evaporated. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking care of my sister." Amara cut into her pancakes with more force than necessary. "That's what I'm here for." Still, it means everything to her, to us. Don't. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Don't do that. Don't pretend we're on the same team just because I'm helping Vivian." Sophia stopped chewing, her eyes darting between the adults with the instinctive awareness children develop when they grow up around conflict. Nikolai's jaw tightened. "Sophia, why don't you take your plate to the kitchen and ask Cook for more strawberries?" "But I have strawberries now, little star." The girl hesitated, then slid off her chair, carefully carrying her plate toward the door. The moment she disappeared into the hallway, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Nikolai leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. "You have every right to be angry with me, but don't weaponize my daughter to make your point." "I wasn't—" Amara stopped, took a breath. "I wasn't weaponizing anyone, but you don't get to act like we're old friends who lost touch. You left me standing in that alley in the rain without a word of explanation. For 5 years I thought I'd done something wrong, that I'd misread everything, that I was just some stupid girl who fell for a player's routine. You didn't do anything wrong. Then what the hell happened, Nikolai?" Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "Because one minute you were kissing me like I was the only thing that mattered, and the next you were gone. And now I find out you're... this." She gestured at the opulent room, the guards outside, the empire he commanded. "So tell me, what was I? A game? A distraction? One last taste of normal before you inherited your kingdom?" He stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something struggle beneath his controlled exterior, something raw and desperate trying to claw its way out. "My parents were murdered that night," he said finally, each word precise and deliberate. "That phone call was my uncle telling me they'd been killed in a car bombing. And in the 30 seconds after I hung up, I had to decide whether to bring you into my world or protect you from it." His hands curled into fists on the table. "I chose to protect you. I chose to walk away so you wouldn't become a target. So you could have the normal life you deserved instead of this." The words hit her like physical blows. She'd known about the deaths. Vivian had mentioned it, but she hadn't connected the timing, hadn't realized the phone call that destroyed her heart had been that phone call. "You didn't give me a choice," she said, her voice shaking. "You just decided my life for me and disappeared. I was 22 years old and I'd just lost everything. My parents were dead. I was inheriting an empire I wasn't ready for. People were already circling, waiting to see if I was weak enough to take down." He stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. "And all I could think about was you standing in that alley, looking at me like I was someone worth saving. If I'd brought you into this world, Amara, you would have died. Maybe not that week or that month, but eventually someone would have used you against me. Someone would have put a bullet in your head just to prove they could. So you made the decision for both of us?" "Yes." He turned to face her, and the anguish in his expression was so naked it hurt to look at. "Because I was selfish enough to kiss you in the first place, but not selfish enough to let you die for it." Silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of unspoken pain. Amara pushed back from the table, her appetite gone. "I need to check on Vivian." Amara, don't! She held up the hand, stopping him. Don't make this about noble sacrifice. You could have called. You could have sent a letter. You could have done literally anything except leave me with nothing but questions and the memory of a kiss that apparently meant more to me than it did to you. She walked out before he could respond, her heart hammering, tears threatening to spill. Behind her, she heard something crash. The sound of Nikolai's fist hitting the wall, or maybe a chair being thrown. She didn't turn around to check. Sophia was waiting in the hallway, her small face worried. Did I do something bad? Amara knelt down, forcing a smile. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. The grown-ups just need to figure some things out. Papa gets sad a lot, Sophia said matter-of-factly. Since Mama died. He tries to hide it, but I can tell. The simple observation gutted her. This child, this beautiful, perceptive child, had already learned to read the emotional temperature of a household built on violence and grief, had already adapted to a world where sadness was something you hid. I'm sorry about your mama, Amara said softly. Sophia shrugged with the heartbreaking acceptance of a child who'd already learned that death was permanent. Aunt Vivian says Mama is with the stars now. That's why Papa calls me Little Star, because I'm Mama's special star that stayed with him. Oh, God. Amara pulled Sophia into a hug, this child who'd lost so much and still managed to be bright and hopeful and kind. When she finally pulled back, Sophia was smiling. Will you read to me later? Helen always falls asleep, but you don't. Sure, sweetheart. After I check on Aunt Vivian. She found Vivian awake and alert, propped up against pillows with a knowing expression on her face. Did you eat the pancakes? Vivian asked. Some of them. Did you talk? Unfortunately, Vivian sighed. You're both so stubborn. It's actually impressive. Amara sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted. He says he was protecting me, that if he'd stayed, I would have died. He's probably right. That doesn't make it okay, Viv. He didn't even give me a chance to understand. He just decided. That's what men like Nikolai do, Vivian said quietly. They make impossible choices and live with the consequences because nobody else can. Because if they hesitate or show weakness or allow themselves to be human, people die. She reached for Amara's hand. My brother has made terrible decisions. He's done things I can't even think about without feeling sick. But every single thing he's done has been to protect the people he loves, even when that protection looks like cruelty. Ivan? Amara asked. Your husband, what happened to him? Vivian's expression shuddered. Ivan worked for the family. He was good at his job. Too good. Someone from a rival organization decided he was a threat and put 3 bullets in his chest while Sophia watched from the car. Her voice went flat, emotionless. Nikolai found the men responsible and made sure they understood what happens when you hurt his family. It took 6 months. He was very thorough. The casual way she said it, like discussing the weather, made Amara's skin crawl. This was the world Nikolai inhabited, where violence was currency and revenge was justice. I don't know if I can be part of this, Amara admitted. Even temporarily, it's too much. I know. Vivian squeezed her hand, but Sophia needs you. And whether you want to admit it or not, my brother needs you too. You remind him he used to be human. Over the next week, an uneasy routine developed. Amara spent her days with Vivian, monitoring the steady decline, adjusting medications, providing comfort as the cancer continued its relentless progression. Sophia became her shadow, following her from room to room, chattering endlessly about everything and nothing. The little girl was starved for female attention. Helen was competent but distant. The housekeepers were kind but busy, and Vivian was dying. So Sophia latched onto Amara with the desperate intensity of a child who'd already lost too much. They read stories in the garden. They baked cookies in the massive kitchen, flour everywhere. Sophia's laughter echoing off marble countertops. They played dress-up with clothes from some closet that probably contained more wealth than Amara would earn in a lifetime. And through it all, Nikolai watched from a distance. Amara felt his presence constantly. The weight of his gaze when she played with Sophia in the garden, the way he'd appear in doorways and then disappear when she looked up, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway late at night when she was sitting with Vivian. They didn't speak. didn't acknowledge each other beyond brief, unavoidable encounters that left her chest tight and her hands shaking. But the awareness was always there, crackling beneath her skin like electricity, waiting for a storm. It was Maxim Orlov who finally forced the confrontation. Amara had seen Nikolai's uncle around the estate, a tall, distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and cold eyes that lingered too long on everyone he passed. Something about him made her skin crawl, though she couldn't articulate why. He was always polite, always proper, but there was something predatory in the way he moved through the house, like a shark circling wounded prey. She was sitting in Vivienne's room one afternoon, reading aloud from a novel while her friend dozed, when Maxime appeared in the doorway. "Miss Bennet," he said smoothly. "May I have a word?" Amara glanced at Vivienne, but she was deep asleep, her breathing steady and even. "Of course." She followed Maxime into the hallway, uncomfortable with how he positioned himself between her and the door. Up close, his smile was charming and empty. "I wanted to thank you personally for caring for my niece," he said. "Vivienne speaks very highly of you. She's my friend. I'm glad I can help. Still, it's generous of you to take time away from your life. I understand you work as a hospice nurse in the city?" The question felt loaded, though Amara couldn't figure out why. "Yes. And you have no attachments? No husband or boyfriend wondering where you've disappeared to?" "That's really none of your business." His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Of course. Forgive me. I'm simply trying to understand the situation. You appear very suddenly in our home, and my nephew seems quite affected by your presence." There it was, the real reason for this conversation. "I'm here for Vivienne," Amara said carefully. "Nothing else." And yet I notice Nikolai has been distracted lately, less focused on business, spending more time at home, making pancakes. He said the last word like it was evidence of a crime. "The timing is unfortunate. We have important negotiations happening this month, alliances that need to be solidified. The last thing we need is for Nikolai to become emotionally compromised." "Then maybe you should take this up with him instead of interrogating me in a hallway." Maxim's expression hardened, the charm dropping away to reveal something darker underneath. "I'm simply suggesting that it might be better for everyone if you completed your work here and returned to your normal life. Vivienne is dying. That's a tragedy. But the family will move forward, as we always do. And Nikolai needs to focus on his responsibilities rather than distractions from his past." "Are you threatening me?" "Of course not." The smile returned, oily and insincere. "I'm merely offering advice. This world," he gestured at the opulent hallway, "it's not for people like you. People who value things like morality and compassion. Those qualities don't survive long here. They get crushed or corrupted. And I would hate to see that happen to someone as principled as you appear to be." Before Amara could respond, Nikolai's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Uncle Maxim, is there a problem?" He stood at the end of the hallway, hands in his pockets, expression carefully neutral. But Amara could feel the violence radiating off him, could see it in the way he held himself, coiled and ready, a weapon waiting for permission to strike. Maxim turned, all easy charm again. "No problem at all. Simply introducing myself to Miss Bennet. She's doing wonderful work with Vivienne." "Then I'm sure she needs to get back to it." Nikolai's eyes never left his uncle's face. "And I'm sure you have business to attend to in the city." It wasn't a suggestion. Maxim's smile tightened, but he nodded graciously. "Of course, Miss Bennet, a pleasure." He walked past Nikolai without another word, and the tension in the hallway evaporated with his departure. Amara realized she'd been holding her breath. Nikolai waited until his uncle's footsteps faded, then moved closer. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing, just made it clear I'm not welcome here long term." His jaw clenched. "Maxim doesn't determine who's welcome in my house." "Doesn't he?" Amara met his eyes. "Because it seems like he has opinions about everything you do, and you listen. He's my uncle. He helped me survive taking over the family when I was barely old enough to vote. I value his counsel. His counsel, or his control." The words landed hard. Nikolai's expression shifted into something dangerous, and for a moment Amara wondered if she'd pushed too far. But then he exhaled slowly, and she saw exhaustion replace anger. "You don't understand how this works," he said quietly. "Then explain it to me." "Why?" You're leaving as soon as Vivian... He couldn't finish the sentence. You're leaving. That's what you want, isn't it? To go back to your normal life and pretend this never happened? Is that what you want? The question hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Nikolai stared at her, and she watched the battle play out across his face. Duty versus desire, control versus chaos, the man he'd become versus the boy he'd been. It doesn't matter what I want, he said finally. It never has. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. That's reality. He started to walk away, then stopped, his back to her. Stay away from Maxime. He's family, but he's also ambitious, and ambitious men in this world are dangerous. Noted. He left without another word, and Amara stood alone in the hallway, her heart racing, trying to understand why every conversation with Nikolai felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. That night, she couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the silence pressing down like a physical weight. She wandered downstairs around 2 a.m, looking for tea or warm milk or anything to calm her racing thoughts. The kitchen was dark except for a single light over the stove. Amara was halfway to the refrigerator when she realized she wasn't alone. Nikolai sat at the kitchen island, a glass of whiskey in front of him, still wearing his suit from earlier minus the jacket. He looked up when she entered, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. Can't sleep? He asked finally. No? You? Sleep is optional. He gestured to the glass. Want one? She should have said no. Should have grabbed her tea and retreated to the safety of her guest room. Instead, she found herself sliding onto the stool across from him while he poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a second glass. They drank in silence. The whiskey burned going down, smooth and expensive, and nothing like the cheap stuff she'd split with roommates in college. Outside, security lights illuminated the grounds. Inside, the massive house creaked and settled around them. Sophia loves you, Nikolai said quietly. She talks about you constantly. Miss Amara did this. Miss Amara said that. Miss Amara taught me how to braid hair. Amara smiled despite herself. She's a good kid. She is. Too good for this life. He swirled the whiskey in his glass. Vivian wants me to send her to boarding school in Switzerland after. Somewhere safe, somewhere normal. Do you want that? I want her to have choices I never did. To grow up without armed guards and panic rooms and watching people die. His voice cracked slightly. I want her to meet someone in a rain-soaked alley and not have to walk away because loving them would get them killed. The vulnerability in his words stole her breath. Nikolai, I think about that night all the time, he continued, his eyes fixed on the glass. I think about what would have happened if my phone hadn't rung, if my parents had come home safe, if I'd taken your number and actually called you the next day like a normal person. He finally looked up, and the raw pain in his expression made her chest ache. I think about the life we could have had, and then I wake up and remember that life was never possible because men like me don't get happy endings. Maybe you don't get them because you don't let yourself try. Or maybe I don't let myself try because I've seen what happens to the people I love. He drained his glass. My parents, Vivian's husband, every soldier who ever took a bullet meant for someone in my family. This world doesn't care about love, Amara. It only cares about power. And the moment someone realizes you love something, that becomes the weapon they use against you. That's not living. That's just surviving. Welcome to my entire existence. She wanted to reach across the island, take his hand, tell him it didn't have to be this way. But the gulf between them felt impossibly wide, built from 5 years of silence and choices neither of them could take back. For what it's worth, Amara said quietly, I forgive you. For that night. For walking away. I don't agree with it, and I still think you should have given me a choice, but I understand why you did it. Nikolai's eyes closed briefly, like the words had hit him physically. When he opened them again, they were wet. Don't, he whispered. Don't forgive me. I don't deserve it. Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway. The air between them shifted, charged with something electric and dangerous. Nikolai stood abruptly, and Amara thought he was leaving. Instead, he moved around the island until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. You should go back upstairs, he said, but his voice was rough, contradicting the words. Before I do something we'll both regret. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should listen, should stand up and walk away, should remember that this man was dangerous and complicated and built from violence. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. What if I don't want to go? His control cracked. She saw it happen, saw the moment 5 years of discipline and denial shattered against the reality of her sitting in front of him, looking up with eyes that said she understood exactly what she was offering. Nikolai's hand came up, his fingers brushing her jaw with devastating gentleness. Amara, don't, she whispered. Don't talk yourself out of this. Don't tell me all the reasons it's wrong. Just don't. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. It was 5 years of longing compressed into a single moment, desperate and consuming and absolutely inevitable. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers curled into his shirt. The whiskey glass tumbled to the floor, and neither of them cared. He tasted like smoke and whiskey and desperation. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the way his mouth moved against hers like he was drowning, and she was air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nikolai pressed his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he said, but his hands were still cradling her face like she was something precious. I don't care. You should. Well, I don't. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I don't care about your empire or your uncle's political games or whatever threat you think I represent. I care about you, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Then Sophia's voice shattered the moment. Papa? They jumped apart like guilty teenagers. Sophia stood in the kitchen doorway in her princess pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes enormous. Nikolai crossed to his daughter immediately, kneeling down. What's wrong, little star? Bad dream? Sophia nodded, then her eyes found Amara. Were you and Miss Amara fighting? No, sweetheart, just talking. It looked like you were kissing. Out of the mouths of children. Amara felt her face flush hot. Nikolai recovered first, his voice gentle. Grown-ups are complicated, little star. Come on, let's get you back to bed. He scooped Sophia into his arms, and she rested her head on his shoulder, already half asleep again. Over his daughter's head, Nikolai's eyes found Amara's, and the look he gave her was equal parts longing and regret. Then he carried Sophia out of the kitchen, and Amara was left alone with a broken whiskey glass and the taste of him still on her lips. She didn't see him for 2 days after that. Vivian noticed immediately. What happened? She demanded from her bed, her voice weak but determined. You two finally stopped circling each other, and now he's disappeared again. Talk. We kissed, Amara admitted, in the kitchen at 2 a.m, and then Sophia walked in, and now he's apparently decided avoidance is the answer. Vivian laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. Of course he has. My brother's superpower is self-sabotage. She grabbed Amara's hand with surprising strength. Don't let him run. Not this time. He needs you, even if he's too stubborn to admit it. But Nikolai was very good at running, even when he never left the house. Amara finally cornered him on the 3rd day, catching him as he emerged from his study late in the afternoon. He saw her and immediately tried to pivot toward the stairs, but she blocked his path. We need to talk. I have a meeting in the city. Nikolai. She said his name like a command. Stop running. His jaw tightened, but he stepped back into the study, holding the door open. Amara followed, and he closed it behind them, sealing them into a room that smelled like leather and expensive cigars and generations of masculine authority. That kiss was a mistake, he said, before she could speak. I shouldn't have... Don't. Amara cut him off. Don't you dare try to tell me that meant nothing. I saw your face. I felt the way you held me. That wasn't nothing. It doesn't matter what it was. It can't happen again. Why? Give me one good reason. Because I'm having dinner with the Morozov family next week. The words exploded out of him. Because Maxim has arranged a meeting to discuss a potential alliance that would require my engagement to Viktor Morozov's daughter. Because this empire needs stability, and I can't provide that if I'm emotionally compromised by a woman who doesn't belong in this world. The words hit her like physical blows. Arranged marriage, alliance, empire, all the things that mattered more than what they felt. So that's it, Amara said, her voice shaking. You're just going to marry someone you don't love because your uncle decided it's good for business. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked. And what about Sophia? What about showing her there's more to life than duty and obligation and political marriages? I'm showing her that sometimes we do things we don't want to do because it's necessary. He moved behind his desk, putting furniture between them like a barricade. You need to leave, Amara. As soon as Vivian... He stopped, unable to say it. As soon as the end comes, you need to go back to your life and forget this happened. I already did that once. It didn't work. Then try harder. The cruelty in his voice was deliberate, designed to push her away. But Amara had spent enough time around dying people to recognize someone lashing out from pain. I'm not leaving until Vivian is gone, she said quietly. After that, you'll never have to see me again. But until then, I'm staying. For her. Not for you. She left before he could respond, her chest tight, tears threatening to spill. That night, Vivienne took a turn for the worse. Amara sat beside the bed holding her friend's hand, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest, listening to the rattle in her breathing that meant the end was coming soon. Sophia had been sent to stay with a family friend for a few days. Nikolai's one act of mercy, sparing his daughter from watching another loved one die. Around midnight, Vivian's eyes opened, surprisingly clear despite the morphine. You're here, she whispered. Always. Liar. But Vivian smiled. You're going to leave after I'm gone. Viv, it's okay. I understand. Her grip tightened weakly. But I need you to know something about that night, the night you met Nikolai. Amara leaned closer. I knew, Vivian breathed. He came to see me the next day after the funeral arrangements were made. He was destroyed, Amara, absolutely shattered. And he told me about this girl he'd met, this beautiful, sharp, impossible girl who made him feel human for exactly 10 seconds before everything burned. She coughed, a wet sound that made Amara's chest ache. He told me he'd walked away from you to protect you, and I told him he was an idiot. Viv. I told him that love is worth fighting for, that protection without choice is just control. But he wouldn't listen. He was too convinced he was poison. Her eyes found Amara's, fierce despite the pain. Don't let him be right. Don't let him die alone in this fortress because he's too afraid to be human. He's marrying someone else. He's terrified. There's a difference. Vivian's breathing grew more labored. Promise me. Promise you'll fight for him, even if he doesn't deserve it. I promise. Vivian smiled, her eyes drifting closed. Good. Now get Nikolai. I need to talk to my idiot brother. Amara found him in his study, staring at paperwork he wasn't actually reading. When she appeared in the doorway, his face went pale. It's time, she said simply. They walked back to Vivian's room in silence. Helen was already there, adjusting medications, her face professionally neutral despite the tears on her cheeks. Nikolai sat on the edge of the bed, taking his sister's hand. Vivian's eyes opened one last time, focusing on him with effort. Stop being stupid, she whispered. He laughed, a broken sound. That's your dying wisdom? Best I can do. She squeezed his hand weakly. She's the one, Kolya. She's always been the one. Don't throw that away because you're afraid. Viv, I can't. Yes, you can. You just won't. Her eyes slid to Amara standing in the doorway. Take care of my idiot brother and my daughter. They need you. I will. Vivian smiled, satisfied. Then her eyes closed, her breathing slowed, and 10 minutes later, she was gone. Nikolai sat frozen beside the bed, still holding his sister's hand, his face carved from stone. Amara stood watching him, this man she'd loved and lost and found again. This man who'd just lost the last piece of his original family. This man who looked like he was shattering from the inside out. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. I'm so sorry. His fingers curled around hers, grip painful in its intensity. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. 3 days, he said. The funeral is in 3 days. After that, you leave. No arguments, no looking back. You get out of this life before it destroys you too. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And Amara realized that no matter what Vivian had said, no matter what she felt, Nikolai had already made his choice. He was going to push her away again. And this time, she didn't know if she had the strength to fight back. Vivienne's funeral took place on a Tuesday morning under gray skies that threatened rain but never delivered. The cemetery stretched across rolling hills outside the Hamptons, old money and older graves, marble headstones marking generations of families whose names appeared in history books, and financial scandals with equal frequency. Amara stood apart from the main gathering, watching hundreds of people she didn't know pay their respects to a woman most of them had barely met. Politicians, business owners, men in expensive suits who looked like they ate glass for breakfast. The Volkov Empire had turned out in force, not to mourn Vivienne, but to assess Nikolai, to measure his stability, his strength, his fitness to continue leading. She could see him at the center of it all, standing beside the casket with Sophia clutching his hand. The little girl wore a black dress that made her look impossibly small, her face blank with the kind of shock that came from losing too many people too young. Nikolai's expression was carved from ice, showing nothing, revealing nothing. The perfect mask of a man who'd learned early that vulnerability was weakness, and weakness got you killed. He hadn't looked at Amara once since they'd arrived. The service was brief and impersonal, conducted by someone who clearly hadn't known Vivienne at all. Empty words about loss and legacy and the comfort of memory. Amara wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and tell them all who Vivienne really was. The girl who'd smuggled wine into their dorm room, who'd laughed at stupid movies and cried during animal rescue commercials, who'd believed people were fundamentally good despite growing up in a world that proved otherwise every single day. But this wasn't that kind of funeral. This was theater, performance, a display of power and continuity wrapped in mourning clothes. When it ended, people began dispersing toward the line of black cars waiting on the cemetery road. Amara started to follow, planning to slip away quietly, but a hand caught her elbow. Maxim Orlov smiled down at her with all the warmth of a shark. "Miss Bennett, I wanted to express my condolences. I know you and Vivienne were quite close. Thank you." She tried to pull her arm free, but his grip tightened. "I also wanted to remind you of our previous conversation, about timing, about distractions." His voice dropped lower, intimate and threatening all at once. "Nikolai has important obligations this week. The Morozov family arrives tomorrow for dinner, contractual discussions that will shape the next decade of this organization. I trust you understand how crucial it is that nothing interferes with those negotiations." "I'm leaving today," Amar said flatly. "You won't have to worry about me interfering with anything." "Excellent." His smile widened. "I knew you were a reasonable woman. So few people are these days." He released her arm and walked away, and Amara stood there rubbing the spot where his fingers had dug in, watching him join a cluster of men near the cars. They all looked the same. Expensive suits, dead eyes, hands that had probably pulled triggers more times than they'd held children. She found Nikolai standing alone beside Vivienne's grave after everyone else had left. Sophia was with Helen, being loaded into one of the cars. The cemetery had gone quiet except for the wind moving through the trees. "I'm leaving," Amara said, because someone had to break the silence. Nikolai didn't turn around. "I know." Sophia asked if I'd stay for her birthday next month. "Tell her you can't." "I already did." Amara moved closer until she was standing beside him, both of them staring at the fresh earth and the casket waiting to be lowered. She cried. His jaw clenched, the only sign he'd heard her. "Vivienne told me she knew," Amara continued, "about us, about that night 5 years ago. She said you came to her the next day and told her about the girl you'd met, the one you walked away from. Vivienne talked too much." "She talked exactly enough." Amara turned to face him directly. "She told me to fight for you, to not let you die alone in your fortress because you're too afraid to be human." Finally, Nikolai looked at her. The grief in his eyes was so raw it hurt to witness. "My sister was a romantic who died at 34 because this life destroyed her body from the inside out. Forgive me if I don't take relationship advice from her deathbed. The cruelty was intentional, designed to push Amara away, but she was done being pushed." "You're not protecting me by making me leave," she said quietly. "You're just protecting yourself from having to feel something real. Feeling something real is how people die in my world. Then maybe it's time to change your world." Nikolai laughed, a bitter sound. "You think it's that simple? You think I can just walk away from 3 generations of empire because a woman I kissed once 5 years ago shows up and reminds me I used to be different? I think you're using your empire as an excuse to avoid living, and I think you're naive enough to believe love conquers all. He turned to face her fully now, and she saw the walls slam down behind his eyes. Go home, Amara. Find someone normal. Someone who can take you to dinner without checking for snipers. Someone whose idea of a romantic evening doesn't include counting exits and wearing a gun. Someone who deserves you. What if I don't want someone who deserves me? What if I want you? The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and absolutely terrifying. For one moment, she saw his control waver, saw the boy from the alley struggling against the man he'd become. Then his phone rang. Nikolai answered it without breaking eye contact. Yes. A pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call. The Morozov family arrived early. I need to go. Of course you do. Amara, save it. She was done. Done fighting. Done hoping. Done breaking her heart against the fortress he'd built. I'll be gone by the time you get back. Good luck with your arranged marriage and your empire and your lonely, miserable life. She walked away before he could respond, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall until she was alone. The drive back to the estate took 15 minutes. Amara packed in 10, throwing her belongings into the duffel bag she'd brought 3 weeks ago when this had all started. 3 weeks. That's all it had taken to fall completely apart over a man she'd never really had. She was dragging her bag toward the stairs when Sophia appeared in the hallway. You're leaving? The little girl's voice was small, devastated. Amara's heart shattered. She knelt down, pulling Sophia into a hug. I have to, sweetheart. I have to go back to work. But you'll come visit, right, for my birthday? I don't know if I can. Sophia pulled back, her gray eyes, so much like her father's, filling with tears. Is it because Papa's getting married to someone else? The words hit like a gut punch. Who told you that? I heard Uncle Maxim talking to the guards. He said Papa was meeting his new wife today. Her small face crumpled. I don't want a new mama. I want you. Oh, God. Amara pulled Sophia close again, her own tears finally spilling over. Listen to me, sweetheart. Your Papa loves you more than anything in this world. Whatever happens, whatever changes, that will never stop being true, okay? But why can't you stay? Because your father is terrified of being happy. Because this world destroys everything soft and good. Because I'm not strong enough to keep fighting for someone who won't fight back. Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make sense, Amara said instead. But I promise you, you're going to be okay. You're smart and brave and so loved. She kissed Sophia's forehead, grabbed her bag, and fled before she lost her nerve completely. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur of tears and rage, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from emotional warfare. By the time Amara reached her apartment, a cramped studio in a building where the radiator screamed and the neighbors fought at 2 a.m, it felt like she'd been gone for years instead of weeks. Her roommate was out. The apartment was silent. Amara dropped her bag, collapsed onto her bed, and let herself fall completely apart. She'd known better. She'd known from the moment she saw Nikolai standing in Vivian's doorway that this would end badly. But some stupid, hopeful part of her had believed that maybe, just maybe, the kiss in the rain had meant as much to him as it had to her. That maybe 5 years of silence had been about protection instead of indifference. But protection without choice was just control, and control without love was just cruelty. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Miss Bennett, this is Maxim Orlov. I wanted to personally thank you for your discretion regarding your departure. Nikolai needs to focus on his future, and your absence will help facilitate that. I trust this is the last communication we'll need to have. She stared at the message, something cold settling in her stomach. The phrasing was wrong. Too satisfied, too final. Like he'd orchestrated something beyond just encouraging her to leave. Before she could analyze it further, another text arrived. This one from a number she recognized. Helen, the nurse. Miss Bennett, I thought you should know. After you left, Mr. Orlov went through Miss Vivian's belongings. He found letters. I don't know what they said, but he looked very pleased. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Miss Vivian trusted you, and I feel like you should know something isn't right. Letters. What letters? Amara called Helen immediately. The older woman answered on the second ring, her voice hushed. Miss Bennett, I shouldn't have texted you. What letters did Maxim find? I don't know. They were in Miss Vivian's nightstand. Sealed envelopes addressed to Nikolai. She'd asked me to make sure he got them after the funeral. But Mr. Orlov said he would handle it personally. Helen paused. Miss Bennett, I've worked for this family for 8 years, and I've never trusted that man. There's something wrong with the way he looks at Nikolai, like he's waiting for something. The cold feeling in Amar's stomach turned to ice. Helen, I need you to do something for me. Can you get into Vivian's room? It's locked now. Mr. Orlov ordered it sealed until the estate can be settled. Who has keys? Security and Mr. Orlov. Another pause. Miss Bennett, what's happening? I don't know yet, but if you see those letters, if you get any chance to read them, call me immediately. She ended the call and sat staring at her phone, pieces of a puzzle she didn't fully understand starting to click together. Maxim's insistence that she leave, his timing with the Morozov marriage alliance, the way he'd looked at Nikolai at the funeral, assessing, calculating, waiting. Vivian's dying words came back to her. Don't let him die alone in this fortress. And earlier, in one of their last conversations, never trust Maxim. Amara pulled up her laptop and started searching. Maxim Orlov, Volkov family, car bombing 5 years ago. She spent 3 hours going down rabbit holes, finding nothing concrete but developing an instinct that something was deeply, horrifically wrong. Her phone rang at midnight. Helen, whispering frantically. I found them, the letters. They were in the study trash. Mr. Orlov must have read them and thrown them away. Papers rustled on the other end. Miss Bennett, you need to hear this. This is what Vivian wrote to Nikolai. Helen began reading, her voice shaking. Kolya, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. And I need you to know something I should have told you years ago, but I was too afraid. Too complicit in staying silent because I didn't want to believe it myself. Maxim killed our parents. I found proof 2 years ago, buried in Ivan's files after he died. Ivan discovered it first. Evidence that Uncle Maxim orchestrated the car bombing that killed Mama and Papa. Bank transfers. Communications with the bomber. A detailed plan to eliminate them and position you as a young, controllable heir. Ivan confronted Maxim about it. 2 weeks later, Ivan was dead, and Maxim made sure I understood what would happen to Sofia if I ever said anything. So I stayed silent. I protected my daughter and watched you dance like a puppet for the man who murdered our parents and my husband. I've hated myself every day since. But now that I'm dying anyway, now that Maxim can't hurt me anymore, I'm telling you the truth. The watch. Maxim wears Papa's watch, the one that should have been destroyed in the explosion. He keeps it as a trophy, Kolya. He wears our father's watch and pretends to be your loyal advisor while controlling everything you do. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know before I died. Maxim is your enemy. He's always been your enemy. And if you don't stop him, he'll destroy you the same way he destroyed everyone else we loved. I'm so sorry, Kolya. I'm so sorry. Helen stopped reading. Silence filled the line except for her ragged breathing. There's more, Helen whispered. Another letter. This one about the Morozov marriage. More rustling, then, the marriage alliance Maxim is pushing. It's a trap. I overheard him talking to Viktor Morozov last month when he thought I was too drugged to understand. Once you're married to Morozov's daughter, once the alliance is formalized, they're planning to eliminate you and take over the Volkov empire together. They'll frame it as an internal coup, blame it on rivals, and Sofia will become their leverage to control the transition. Kolya, do not marry that woman. Do not trust Maxim. And if you're reading this, if I'm already gone, please protect my daughter. She's all that's left of Ivan. All that's left of the family before Maxim poisoned everything. And Amara Bennett, the girl you told me about 5 years ago. If she's still in your life when you read this, don't let her go. Don't make the same mistake twice. Letting love in doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And you need to be human if you're going to survive what's coming. Helen's voice broke. Miss Bennett, what do we do? Amara was already moving, throwing clothes back into her bag with shaking hands. Where's Nikolai right now? He left for the dinner with the Morozov family an hour ago. At Maxim's penthouse in Manhattan. Miss Bennett, if Maxim has any idea that I read these letters, Pack a bag for Sophia. Take her somewhere safe. Don't tell anyone where you're going. But, Helen, do it now. Maxime killed Vivian's husband and framed it as a rival hit. If he thinks you know anything, you're dead. She ended the call and dialed Nikolai's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times with the same result. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. Maxime had orchestrated everything. The bombing that killed Nikolai's parents. The setup that turned a 22-year-old boy into a traumatized heir. 5 years of manipulation and control, all leading to this. A marriage alliance that would end with Nikolai's murder and Maxime seizing complete power. And Nikolai was walking into it completely blind. Amara grabbed her bag and ran. The drive back to Manhattan was 50 minutes of pure panic. She broke every speed limit, her mind racing through scenarios, trying to figure out how to reach Nikolai before it was too late. She tried calling him 15 more times. Nothing. Either his phone was off or Maxime had already made sure he was unreachable. Maxime's penthouse occupied the top floor of a luxury building in Midtown. Security in the lobby. Doorman. Keycard access to the private elevator. Amara had no plan, no credentials, no way to get past any of it. She parked illegally and ran to the entrance. The doorman stepped in front of her immediately. "I need to get upstairs," she gasped. "Nikolai Volkov, there's an emergency." "Ma'am, I can't let you up without authorization." "Call him then. Tell him Amara Bennett needs to speak with him. It's about Vivian. It's urgent." The doorman looked skeptical but picked up his phone, dialing. Amara watched his expression shift to confusion, then concern. He hung up. "Mr. Volkov's phone is off, but I can reach Mr. Orlov." "No!" The word came out too sharp, too desperate. Amara forced herself to take a breath. "Please, just try one more time. Tell Nikolai it's about his father's watch." The doorman hesitated, then dialed again. This time, someone answered. His expression shifted to recognition as he spoke in rapid Russian, then handed her the phone. "Amara?" Nikolai's voice was tight with confusion and barely suppressed anger. "What the hell are you doing here? Don't marry her. Don't finalize anything. I need to talk to you right now." "I'm in the middle of a dinner, Maxim killed your parents." The words came out in a rush. "Vivian left you letters. She knew. She had proof. And Maxim found them and threw them away because he's planning to kill you after the marriage alliance is finalized. Nikolai, you need to get out of there right now." Silence on the other end. Then, "Stay in the lobby. Don't move." The line went dead. Amara waited, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might pass out. The doorman watched her warily, probably wondering if she was insane. Maybe she was. Maybe she just destroyed what little remained of Nikolai's world based on letters from a dying woman and instinct. The elevator dinged. Nikolai emerged alone, his face carved from stone, fury radiating off him like heat. He crossed the lobby in 4 strides and grabbed Amara's arm, pulling her toward the entrance. "Outside. Now!" They made it to the sidewalk before he rounded on her, his control fracturing. "What the hell did you just say to me?" "Vivian left you letters about Maxim, about your parents' death, about the marriage being a trap." Amara fumbled with her phone, pulling up Helen's number. "Helen can confirm everything. She read them. Maxim threw them away, but she found them in the trash. This is insane. Call Helen. Ask her yourself." His hands were shaking. Amara had never seen him lose composure like this, but she could see him unraveling in real time. 5 years of carefully constructed reality crumbling against a truth he didn't want to face. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Helen answered immediately, and from the way Nikolai's face went completely white, Amara knew the nurse was confirming everything. The call lasted 3 minutes. When Nikolai hung up, he looked like he might collapse. "The watch," he said, his voice hollow. "My father's watch. Maxime wears it. I've seen it 1,000 times and never questioned it because he said—" He stopped, pressing his fingers against his eyes. "He said my father gave it to him the week before the bombing, as a gift, a gesture of trust. It was a trophy. 5 years." Nikolai's hands curled into fists. 5 years I've taken his advice, let him guide every major decision, trusted him with my family's legacy. He looked up at Amara, and the anguish in his eyes was devastating. Ivan, Vivian's husband, he figured it out first, and Maxime had him killed. and then he threatened Sophia to keep Vivian silent. My sister lived 2 more years knowing who murdered her husband and couldn't say anything because her daughter's life depended on her silence. Nikolai, I have to go back upstairs. His voice had gone flat, empty. I have to finish this dinner and finalize the alliance documents. If I don't, if Maxim suspects I know, he'll move up his timeline. He'll kill me tonight and blame it on the Morozovs. You can't go back up there alone. I don't have a choice. Then I'm coming with you. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight enough to bruise. Amara, no. If this goes wrong, boss. If it goes wrong, at least I'll be there to watch you die instead of hearing about it secondhand like last time. She met his eyes steadily. I'm done letting you face things alone. So either we go up there together or I call the police and blow this whole thing up right now. For one moment, she thought he might refuse. Then his control cracked completely, and he pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had just detonated. I'm so tired, he whispered against her hair. I'm so fucking tired of this life. I know. She held him tighter. But you're not alone anymore. So let's go end this. They rode the elevator in silence, Nikolai's hand wrapped around hers like a lifeline. The doors opened onto a private foyer, and beyond it, Amara could hear voices, laughter, the clink of glasses, the sound of people who thought they were celebrating instead of attending the prelude to a murder. Nikolai stopped just before they reached the door, turning to face her one last time. Whatever happens in there, he said quietly, I need you to know something. That night in the alley wasn't just 10 seconds of freedom for me. It was the last time I felt human, and every day since I've regretted walking away from you. Tell me again when we survive this. Deal. He pushed open the door, and they walked together into the dining room where Maxim Orlov sat at the head of a long table, flanked by Viktor Morozov and a beautiful young woman who must have been the intended bride. Security stood at strategic points around the room. Wine glasses glittered in candlelight. Everything looked civilized and normal and absolutely lethal. Maxim's eyes landed on Amara, and for just a fraction of a second, she saw his mask slip, saw the calculation, the fury, the realization that something had gone very wrong with his carefully constructed plan. Then the smile returned, smooth and poisonous. Nikolai, he said warmly, I wasn't expecting you to bring a guest. Miss Bennett. What a surprise. Nikolai's hand tightened on Amara's. She felt him gathering himself, preparing for the performance of his life, the one that would either expose Maxim and save them both, or end with them dead before dessert was served. Actually, Uncle, Nikolai said, his voice perfectly controlled, Amara had something interesting to tell me. Something about letters my sister left. Letters you apparently decided I shouldn't see. The room went very, very still. Maxim's smile never wavered, but Amara saw his hand move beneath the table, and she knew with absolute certainty that he was reaching for a weapon. This was it, the point of no return. Either they walked out of this room alive, or neither of them walked out at all. The silence in the dining room stretched like a wire pulled too tight, seconds away from snapping. Maxim's hand remained beneath the table, his expression still frozen in that urbane smile that didn't reach his eyes. Viktor Morozov looked confused, glancing between Nikolai and Maxim, trying to read a situation that had just shifted into dangerous territory. His daughter, Katya, Amara remembered from the earlier conversation, sat perfectly still, her champagne glass halfway to her lips. The 4 security men stationed around the room had straightened, hands drifting toward concealed weapons, waiting for orders that hadn't come yet. Nikolai kept his grip on Amara's hand, his thumb pressing against her pulse point like he was reminding himself she was real. When he spoke again, his voice was conversational, almost pleasant, but Amara could feel the violence coiled beneath every word. Vivian was very thorough in her final correspondence. Nikolai continued, moving slowly into the room, positioning himself so Amara was slightly behind him. She wrote about several interesting topics. The car bombing that killed our parents, for instance. Bank transfers. Communications with the bomber. Evidence my brother-in-law discovered before his untimely death. Maxim's smile finally cracked. Nikolai, your sister was very ill. The medication she was taking can cause paranoia, delusions. She also wrote about your watch. Nikolai's eyes dropped to Maxim's wrist, where the gold timepiece gleamed in the candlelight. My father's watch. The one that should have been destroyed in the explosion. The one you claimed he gave you as a gift the week before he died. He did give it to me? Liar. The word came out soft, lethal. My father never took that watch off. It was a gift from my mother on their 20th anniversary. He wore it every single day for 5 years, and the only way you could have gotten it was if you took it off his body after the bomb detonated. Viktor Morozov pushed back from the table, his face darkening. Nikolai, what the hell is happening here? What's happening, Nikolai said, never taking his eyes off Maxim, is that my uncle has been manipulating me since I was 22 years old. He murdered my parents to position me as a young, controllable heir. He murdered my brother-in-law when Ivan discovered the truth. And he threatened my 4-year-old niece to keep my sister silent while the cancer ate her alive. His voice dropped to something cold and deadly. And now he's arranged this marriage alliance so he and you, Viktor, can eliminate me and take control of the Volkov Empire together. The room exploded into chaos. Viktor shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. That's insane! I came here in good faith to discuss an alliance. Did you? Nikolai pulled a folded paper from his jacket. One of the letters Helen must have managed to get to him somehow. Because my sister overheard you and Maxim planning my murder. She wrote down dates, times, exact quotes. You agreed to help him frame it as an internal coup. Your daughter marries me. I die within 6 months, and you split control of my territory. Katya Morozov had gone pale, her eyes darting to her father. Papa. Shut up, Katya. Viktor's hand disappeared into his jacket, and Nikolai moved faster than Amara could track, his own weapon appearing from beneath his suit jacket and leveling at Viktor's chest. Don't. Nikolai's voice was dead calm. You pull that gun and every man in this room dies, including your daughter. The security guards had their weapons out now, but they were frozen, unsure who to point them at. Nikolai, Viktor, or Maxim, who still sat at the head of the table with his hand beneath the white tablecloth. Amara's heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She wanted to run, to drag Nikolai out of this room before the shooting started, but her feet were rooted to the floor. This was it. The moment everything either resolved or detonated into violence that would leave bodies scattered across expensive carpet. Maxim finally moved, withdrawing his hand slowly, empty, palms up in a gesture of surrender. But his eyes were calculating, measuring angles, counting options. Nikolai, he said, his voice gentle, paternal, the same tone he'd used 1,000 times over 5 years. You're upset. You just lost your sister. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 5 years. Nikolai's gun hand never wavered. Viktor, sit down and put your hands on the table where I can see them. Your daughter, too. Viktor hesitated, fury and calculation warring across his face. Then he slowly sank back into his chair, placing both hands flat on the table. Katya followed suit, her face bloodless. Good. Nikolai gestured to the security guards with his free hand. All of you, weapons on the floor, now. None of them moved. They were Maxim's men, Amara realized with growing horror. All of them. Loyal to the uncle, not the nephew. Nikolai had walked into a room full of people who would kill him the moment Maxim gave the order. Do it, Maxim said quietly. Put your weapons down. The guards exchanged glances, then slowly complied, setting their guns on the floor. But they didn't step away from them, and Amara saw how this would play out. The moment Nikolai was distracted, the moment his attention shifted, they would grab those weapons and end this. Nikolai saw it too. She watched the calculation move across his face, watched him measure the odds and come up short. 1 gun against 4 guards, plus whatever Maxim was hiding, plus Viktor Morozov, who definitely hadn't come unarmed. Amara, Nikolai said, not taking his eyes off the room. There's a fire exit at the end of the hallway. I need you to walk very slowly toward it, and when you're through the door, you run. You don't look back. You call the police, and you tell them everything. I'm not leaving you. That wasn't a request. I don't care. Her voice shook but held steady. You don't get to make that choice for me again. Something flickered across Nikolai's face. Frustration or admiration or fear, she couldn't tell. But before he could argue, Maxim started laughing. The sound was wrong, too casual for the moment, like they were discussing business instead of standing on the knife edge of violence. "This is remarkable," Maxim said, leaning back in his chair. "Truly. 5 years of careful planning, and it all comes apart because a dying woman wrote some letters and a nursing student refuses to leave." He looked at Amara directly for the first time, and the contempt in his eyes was palpable. "You should have stayed gone, Miss Bennett. Your presence here has complicated things unnecessarily." "Good," Amara shot back, surprising herself. "I hope I've ruined everything." Maxim's smile turned cruel. "Oh, you haven't ruined anything. You've simply accelerated the timeline." He shifted his attention back to Nikolai. "You're not wrong about the watch, Kolya. Your father did love that watch. He was wearing it when the bomb went off. I took it from his wrist while he was still bleeding out in the front seat of that car, begging me to save your mother." The words landed like physical blows. Nikolai's face went blank, shock and rage and grief all compressed into something so explosive Amara could feel it radiating off him. "He lived for almost 10 minutes, Maxim continued, his voice conversational. "Conscious. In agony. Asking me over and over to help Elena. Your mother was already dead, but he couldn't see her from where he was trapped, so I sat there and watched him die while he begged me to save a corpse." "Stop," Nikolai whispered. "And you want to know what his last words were? Not, 'Tell Nikolai I love him.' Not, 'Protect my family.' He said, 'Maxim, why?' Because even at the end, even bleeding out, he couldn't understand why his own brother would betray him." Nikolai's control shattered. He lunged forward, weapon raised, and everything happened at once. The guards dove for their guns. Viktor Morozov pulled a pistol from his jacket. Katya screamed. Maxim kicked back from the table, his own weapon appearing from beneath the tablecloth. And Amara, operating on pure instinct, grabbed the nearest thing she could reach, a heavy crystal decanter from the sideboard, and hurled it at the closest guard's head. It connected with a sickening crack. The guard went down hard, blood streaming from his temple. His weapon skittered across the floor, and Amara dove for it, her hands closing around metal that was heavier and colder than she expected. She'd never fired a gun in her life, never even held one. But she'd spent 3 weeks watching men carry them, learning the way they moved, the way they held them, the casual violence in every gesture. So when another guard swung toward her, weapon rising, she pointed her stolen gun at his center mass and squeezed the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her backward. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. And the guard collapsed, clutching his shoulder, his own weapon clattering away. 2 down, 2 more guards still moving, plus Maxim, plus Viktor Morozov. Nikolai had reached his uncle, slamming him backward against the wall, his gun pressed under Maxim's chin. But Viktor was moving, his weapon trained on Nikolai's back, and Amara saw the angle, saw how this ended. Viktor would shoot Nikolai. Maxim would kill her, and everything Vivian had tried to prevent would happen anyway. "Nikolai!" Amara screamed. "Behind you!" He twisted, bringing his gun around, but Viktor was already squeezing the trigger. The shot went wild as Katya, sweet, terrified Katya, who'd been silent until now, grabbed her father's arm, yanking it upward. The bullet punched into the ceiling, raining plaster down on them all. "Papa, stop!" Katya was crying, still clinging to her father's arm. I didn't know what you were planning. Please don't make me watch you kill someone." Viktor tried to shake her off, but the hesitation cost him. Nikolai crossed the space between them in 2 strides and slammed the butt of his gun into Viktor's temple. The older man crumpled, unconscious before he hit the floor. That left 2 guards, Maxim and a room full of bodies and broken furniture and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Maxim moved first, using Nikolai's distraction to break free and sprint toward the hallway. Nikolai went after him, and Amara tried to follow, but one of the remaining guards blocked her path, weapon trained on her chest. "Don't move," he said in heavily accented English. Amara froze, her stolen gun suddenly feeling like dead weight in her hands. The guard was young, maybe 25, with cold eyes that said he'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Behind him, she could hear Nikolai and Maxim shouting, the sounds of a struggle. Furniture breaking. The distinctive crack of another gunshot, and Amara's heart stopped. "Nikolai!" She tried to move toward the hallway, but the guard stepped closer, his weapon inches from her face. "I said don't move." The other guard had recovered from being shot, his shoulder streaming blood, but his weapon hand still steady. He moved to block the hallway, and Amara realized with growing horror that they were trapping Nikolai alone with Maxime while keeping her pinned here. She had maybe 3 seconds to make a choice. 3 seconds to decide if she was the kind of person who could shoot someone in cold blood to save the man she loved. Turned out, she was. Amara raised her gun and fired twice, center mass, the way she'd seen in movies. Praying muscle memory from watching crime dramas was enough. The guard in front of her stumbled backward, shock crossing his face. His weapon discharged, the bullet going wide, punching a hole in the wall 6 inches from her head. Then he fell, and Amara was running, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the gun, her ears ringing from the gunshots, her mind screaming that she'd just killed someone, actually killed someone, ended a human life. But Nikolai was in the hallway. Nikolai was fighting his father's murderer, and she wasn't leaving him to face that alone. She found them in the study, a massive room lined with bookshelves and expensive art, now a war zone. Furniture overturned, books scattered everywhere, blood on the carpet. Nikolai and Maxime locked together, both of them bleeding, both fighting with the desperate strength of men who knew only one of them was walking out alive. Maxime was older, but he was trained, experienced, ruthless in ways Nikolai had never fully embraced. He had a knife now, pulled from somewhere, and was trying to drive it into Nikolai's throat while Nikolai gripped his wrist, muscles straining, both of them locked in a death grip. Amara raised her gun, trying to find a clean shot, but they were too close together, moving too fast, and she was terrified of hitting Nikolai instead of Maxime. "Shoot him!" Nikolai gasped, blood running from his split lip. "Amara, shoot him!" But she couldn't risk it, couldn't process the adrenaline and fear, and the fact that she'd already killed one person tonight and her hands wouldn't stop shaking, so she did something else entirely. She dropped the gun, grabbed a heavy brass bookend from the floor, and swung it at Maxime's head with every ounce of strength she possessed. The impact made a sound like a melon splitting. Maxime's eyes rolled back and he collapsed, the knife clattering from his hand. Nikolai stumbled away, gasping for air, pressing a hand to his ribs where blood was seeping through his white shirt. For a moment, they just stood there, both breathing hard, surrounded by destruction, staring at Maxime's unconscious form on the floor. Then Nikolai looked at Amara, his expression somewhere between horror and awe. "Did you just brain my uncle with a bookend? He was going to kill you. You killed a guard in the dining room. He was going to kill me." They stared at each other, the absurdity of the conversation hitting them both at the same time. Nikolai started laughing, a ragged, broken sound that might have been crying if he'd allowed himself tears. Amara joined him, hysteria bubbling up, the adrenaline crashing through her system, making everything feel surreal and disconnected. Then the moment passed, and reality crashed back in. "We need to secure him," Nikolai said, pressing harder against his bleeding side. "And check on the others, and call—" The gunshot came from behind them, so unexpected that Amara didn't process it until she saw Nikolai's expression change, saw him look down at his chest where blood was blossoming across his shirt, a wider stain than the one from his ribs. He took one step toward her, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed. Amara screamed, diving for him, her hands pressing against the wound even though she knew it was bad, possibly fatal, the blood pulsing between her fingers with his heartbeat. Behind her, Maxime was trying to sit up, his face covered in blood from where she'd hit him, his gun still smoking in his hand. "Careless," he slurred, trying to aim the weapon at Amara. "Both of you, too busy celebrating to finish what you started." Amara couldn't move, couldn't let go of Nikolai, who was trying to say her name, his eyes already going unfocused. Couldn't reach the gun scattered around the room. Couldn't do anything except watch Maxime's finger tighten on the trigger. The shot, when it came, wasn't from Maxime's gun. Katya Morozov stood in the doorway, her hands wrapped around her father's weapon, tears streaming down her face, the barrel pointed at Maxime's chest. She fired again, and again, and again, until the gun clicked empty and Maxime slumped backward, his own weapon sliding from his fingers. Then Katya dropped the gun and ran, her sobs echoing down the hallway. Amara turned all her attention back to Nikolai. His eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood everywhere, soaking through her hands, pooling on the expensive carpet beneath them. "Don't you dare," she whispered, pressing harder on the wound. "Don't you dare die on me after everything. Not now. Not when I just got you back." His eyes fluttered open, finding her face. He tried to smile, blood on his teeth. Told you this life would destroy you. Shut up. Save your strength. Amara. His hand found hers, slick with blood. Sophia. Promise me you'll take care of her. Promise me she won't grow up in this world. You're going to take care of her yourself. You're going to survive this, and we're going to figure everything out together. I'm sorry. His grip tightened weakly. For the alley, for walking away, for wasting 5 years being afraid. Tell me again when you survive this. He laughed, a wet sound that terrified her. That was the deal, wasn't it? His eyes were closing again. Amara, I love... No. She shook him, trying to keep him conscious. Don't you dare say goodbye. Don't make this a deathbed confession. You're going to survive and you're going to tell me properly. Do you understand? But he'd stopped responding, his head lolling to the side, his breathing growing more ragged with each second. Amara fumbled for her phone with bloody hands, dialed 911, screamed the address and the situation at the operator. Armed response. Ambulances. Everything they had. Then she went back to applying pressure, leaning all her weight on the wound, trying to slow the bleeding that wouldn't stop. She was still pressing on his chest when the first police officers burst through the door, weapons drawn, shouting for her to get down. She ignored them, refusing to move, refusing to stop trying to save him, even when they pulled her away, even when the paramedics took over, even when they loaded Nikolai onto a gurney and rushed him toward the elevator. A female officer wrapped a blanket around Amara's shoulders, guiding her away from the carnage in the study. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. We need your statement about what happened here. He can't die, Amara said, staring at her blood-covered hands. I just found him again. He can't die. But as they led her out of the penthouse, past the bodies in the dining room, past the overturned furniture and the bullet holes in the walls and the evidence of violence that would make headlines by morning, Amara couldn't shake the image of Nikolai's eyes closing, his final words unfinished, his blood coating her hands like an accusation. She'd fought her way back into his life, had refused to let him push her away, had killed people to protect him, and it still might not be enough. The ambulance was already gone by the time they reached the street, sirens wailing into the Manhattan night. Amara stood on the sidewalk wrapped in a shock blanket, watching the lights disappear around the corner, and felt the last 5 years compress into this single moment of absolute helplessness. She'd saved him from Maxim, but she couldn't save him from the bullet that was stealing his life one heartbeat at a time. And somewhere in the city, Sophia was sleeping, unaware that her father might not survive the night, unaware that the last piece of her family was bleeding out in an operating room while Amara stood powerless to do anything but wait. The detective asking her questions sounded like he was speaking underwater. The chaos around her, police securing the scene, EMTs treating the wounded, officers cordoning off the building, all of it felt distant and unreal. All she could see was Nikolai's face. All she could hear was his voice saying her name. All she could feel was his blood drying between her fingers. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered what she already knew, that even if he survived, even if he opened his eyes again, the man she'd known in that rainy alley 5 years ago was gone forever, burned away by violence and betrayal and the cost of loving in a world built on blood. But she'd promised Vivian, and she'd promised herself. So when the detective asked if she needed to sit down, if she needed medical attention, if she needed anything at all, Amara looked him in the eye and said, I need you to tell me which hospital they took him to, and then I need you to get out of my way. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The war for Nikolai Volkov's soul was just beginning, and Amara Bennett had already proven tonight that she was willing to kill to save it. The question was whether she'd be willing to live for it too. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and despair. Amara sat in a plastic chair bolted to the floor, still wearing clothes stiff with dried blood. Nikolai's blood, mixed with blood from the guard she'd shot, mixed with her own from a cut on her hand she didn't remember getting. The police had questioned her for 3 hours at the station before finally releasing her into the custody of Nikolai's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Irina, who'd arrived with enough legal firepower to make the detectives back off. Self-defense, Irina had said firmly, sitting beside Amara in the interrogation room. My client witnessed an attempted murder and acted to protect herself and Mr. Volkov. The physical evidence will support this completely. And it had. The crime scene told a clear story. Maxim Orlov's fingerprints on the detonator from 5 years ago, bank records showing payments to the bomber, communications outlining the conspiracy. Vivian's letters, recovered from the trash, provided a paper trail that even the most corrupt investigator couldn't ignore. Viktor Morozov was already cooperating with prosecutors, claiming he'd been manipulated by Maxim, throwing his former ally under the bus to save himself. But none of that mattered if Nikolai died. 6 hours. That's how long he'd been in surgery. 6 hours of Amara sitting in this waiting room, watching dawn break through the windows, watching doctors and nurses move past with efficient purpose, watching other families receive news good and bad, while she remained suspended in this limbo of not knowing. Helen had brought Sophia to the hospital around 4 in the morning, the little girl still half asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw Amara, she'd run straight into her arms. "Where's Papa?" "He's with the doctors, sweetheart. They're helping him feel better." Like Aunt Vivian? The question had gutted her. Amara pulled Sophia closer, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and innocence. "Your Papa is strong. He's going to fight really hard to come back to you." Now Sophia slept curled in the chair beside her, her head in Amara's lap, while Helen dozed in the corner and Irina worked through legal documents with relentless focus. The lawyer had already filed emergency custody papers naming Amara as Sophia's temporary guardian if Nikolai became incapacitated, had frozen Maxim's assets, had begun the process of dismantling everything the man had built while pretending to serve the Volkov family. "You should rest," Irina said without looking up from her paperwork. "You've been awake for over 24 hours. "I can't. He'll still be in surgery whether you sleep or not." "I know." Amara stroked Sophia's hair gently. "But if something happens, if they come out to tell me, I need to be awake. I need to be here." Irina finally looked at her, something like understanding softening her usually severe expression. "Vivian told me about you. Last month, when she was updating her will. She said her brother had met someone once who made him believe in something beyond duty and violence. She made me promise that if anything happened to Nikolai, I would find you and bring you back into his life." A pause. "I thought she was being sentimental. Dying people often are. But watching you tonight, watching you fight for him, I understand what she saw. I killed 2 people tonight. You saved lives tonight. There's a difference." Amara closed her eyes, but all she saw was the guard's face, the moment of impact, the way he'd fallen. She'd taken a life, ended someone's existence. No matter how justified, no matter how necessary, that reality would live inside her forever. "Miss Bennett?" A surgeon stood in the doorway, still wearing scrubs, his mask pulled down around his neck. Exhaustion lined his face. "I'm Dr. Richardson. I've been operating on Mr. Volkov." Amar couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Sophia stirred in her lap, blinking awake, sensing the tension. "Is my Papa okay?" Sophia's voice was small, terrified. Dr. Richardson's expression softened slightly. "Your Papa is very strong. The bullet collapsed his right lung and nicked his subclavian artery, which caused significant blood loss. But we were able to repair the damage, and barring any complications, he should make a full recovery." The relief was so overwhelming, Amara thought she might collapse. She pulled Sophia close, both of them shaking, while Helen let out a sob from the corner and Irina closed her eyes briefly. "Can we see him?" Amara managed. "He's in recovery now, still unconscious from the anesthesia. But in a few hours, once we move him to ICU, immediate family can visit for short periods." His eyes moved to Amara specifically. "He was saying your name in pre-op, before we put him under. Kept asking if you were safe." Something in Amara's chest cracked open. After everything, after 5 years of silence, after pushing her away, after trying to protect her by leaving, his final conscious thoughts had been about her safety. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving him." Dr. Richardson nodded and left, and Amara sat there holding Sophia while the sun climbed higher in the sky, and the hospital continued its endless rhythm around them. 3 hours later, a nurse came to take them to ICU. Sophia held Amara's hand tightly, her small fingers trembling, as they walked through corridors that smelled like antiseptic and floor polish. The ICU was all beeping machines and hushed voices, nurses moving between beds with practiced efficiency. Nikolai lay in the 3rd bed, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that monitored every vital sign. His face was pale, bruises darkening along his jaw from the fight with Maxime. An oxygen cannula snaked under his nose. The steady beep of his heart monitor was the most beautiful sound Amara had ever heard. Sophia froze in the doorway, her eyes going wide. "Papa?" "He's sleeping, sweetheart," Amara said gently. "But we can sit with him. We can hold his hand and talk to him. The doctors say he can hear us even when he's sleeping." They approached the bed slowly. Amara took the chair on one side while helping Sophia climb into the chair on the other. The little girl reached out tentatively, her tiny hand closing around her father's much larger one. "Papa, it's Sophia," she whispered. "Miss Amara and I are here. You have to wake up soon because it's almost my birthday and you promised we'd make pancakes together." Nikolai's fingers twitched slightly and Sophia gasped. "He heard me." "He did." Amara took his other hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady pulse beneath her fingers. "Keep talking to him, sweetheart. Tell him about everything." So Sophia did. She told him about the book Helen had been reading to her, about the cookies she and Amara had baked before everything fell apart, about how she'd been practicing her letters because she wanted to write him a birthday card. Her voice gradually lost its fear, becoming animated, childish, normal. Amara just held his hand and watched his chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance, each breath a victory, each heartbeat a promise that maybe, just maybe, they'd survive this. 4 days passed in a blur of ICU visits and police interviews and lawyers managing the fallout from Maxime's death. The story had made national news. Organized crime dynasty torn apart by internal betrayal, young boss nearly killed by his own uncle. The media camped outside the hospital. Federal prosecutors wanted statements. Every vulture who'd ever circled the Volkov empire was calling, testing the waters, trying to determine if this was their chance to move in. Irina handled most of it with ruthless efficiency, but the decisions ultimately fell to Nikolai. And Nikolai was still unconscious, his body healing, but his mind somewhere unreachable. Until the 5th day, when Amara was sitting alone at his bedside in the early morning hours, reading aloud from a book Sophia had chosen, and his hand suddenly squeezed hers. Her head snapped up. His eyes were open, unfocused but aware, trying to track her face. "Nikolai?" She stood, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" His lips moved, trying to form words around the breathing tube. The effort clearly hurt. A nurse appeared immediately, checking vitals, paging the doctor, explaining to Nikolai that he needed to stay calm, that they'd remove the tube soon, but he needed to be patient. 20 minutes later, after the tube was out and he'd stopped coughing, after the doctors had checked him over and adjusted medications and declared him stable, Amara was finally allowed back in. Nikolai looked at her with eyes that were clearer now, more present, and the first thing he said, his voice rough and broken, was, "You're okay." Not a question, a statement of profound relief. "I'm okay," she confirmed, taking his hand again. "You've been out for 5 days. You scared the hell out of everyone." "Maxime?" "Dead. Katya Morozov shot him. She's cooperating with prosecutors. Her father is too, trying to save himself." "Victor?" "In federal custody, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, among other things. Irina says he'll probably take a deal and testify against everyone involved." Nikolai closed his eyes, processing. When he opened them again, they were wet. Vivian's letters, the watch. All of it was true. All of it. Amara squeezed his hand. "I'm so sorry you had to find out that way, that you had to live 5 years not knowing. He sat with my father while he died." Nikolai's voice broke completely. "Watched him bleed out, took his watch, and then came to me at the funeral and told me he'd make sure I was ready to lead, that he'd guide me, that I'd never be alone." He turned his head away, staring at the wall. "I trusted him. I believed every word. You were 22 and traumatized and grieving. He manipulated you when you were most vulnerable. That's not your fault. I let him control everything for 5 years. Every decision, every alliance. Every time I questioned something, he'd remind me I was young, that I needed guidance, that my father would have wanted me to listen to him." Nikolai's jaw clenched. "And the marriage, the alliance with the Morozovs. He was planning to kill me the moment the contract was signed. But he didn't. You survived. We survived. He finally looked at her again, really looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was devastating. You killed people for me. I did what I had to do. That's not your world, Amara. You're a nurse. You save lives. You don't... He couldn't finish. I don't what? Stand by and watch someone I love die? Let armed men shoot me without fighting back? She leaned closer, her voice fierce. I made my choice, Nikolai. I chose to fight. I chose to stay. And I'd make the same choice again. You shouldn't have had to. Maybe not. But I did. She brought his hand to her lips, kissing his knuckles gently. And now we both have to live with what happened, together, because I'm not walking away just because things got hard. Sophia, he said suddenly, panic crossing his face. Where is she? Is she safe? She's with Helen at the estate, under armed guard that Irina personally vetted. She's been visiting every day, talks to you constantly, even when you're unconscious. She's been so brave, Nikolai. I need to see her. She'll be here this afternoon, but first we need to talk about what happens next. Over the next hour, while nurses came and went and machines beeped their steady rhythm, Amara told him everything. The federal investigation into the Volkov organization, the asset freezes, the business partners distancing themselves. The empire he'd inherited at 22 was crumbling, and the question was whether he wanted to rebuild it or let it fall. I'm tired, Nikolai said finally. So tired of living in fear, of making decisions based on who might try to kill me this week, of teaching my daughter to check for exits and recognize the sound of gunfire. He looked at Amara with something like desperation. I don't want this life anymore. I don't want to be this person. Then don't be. It's not that simple. I have obligations, people who depend on me, businesses that employ thousands. You can't just walk away from an empire. Actually, Irina said from the doorway, you can, if you do it correctly. She entered with her briefcase, all business, and spent the next 30 minutes outlining a plan she'd been developing. Legitimate businesses separated from criminal enterprises, assets liquidated or transferred, cooperation with federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity for the legal operations, a complete restructuring that would take years but would ultimately leave Nikolai with a fraction of his wealth and none of his empire. You'd be free, Irina concluded. No more looking over your shoulder. No more living in a fortress. Sophia could go to normal schools, have normal friends, live the childhood Vivian wanted for her. And the people who work for me? The families who depend on Volkov money? Legitimate businesses continue operating under new management. Employees keep their jobs. We're not burning everything down. We're just removing the criminal elements. Irina's expression softened slightly. Your father built an empire on blood. You don't have to maintain it the same way. You get to choose who you become. Nikolai was quiet for a long time, his thumb rubbing circles on Amara's hand, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. Do it. Dismantle everything connected to organized crime. Work with the prosecutors. Get immunity for anyone who wasn't directly involved in violence. And set up trusts for the families of the guards who died in Maxim's penthouse. Their blood is on my hands, even if I didn't pull the triggers. Nikolai, Amara started. No. They died because of my family's war. Their children deserve compensation. He looked at Irina. How long will this take? A year, maybe 18 months if we're aggressive about it. You'll need to stay in New York during the transition. Federal prosecutors will want access to you. But after that? Irina allowed herself a small smile. You could go anywhere. Be anyone. I want to be someone Sophia isn't afraid to bring to school events, Nikolai said quietly. Someone who doesn't make other parents nervous. Someone normal. When Sophia arrived that afternoon with Helen, she ran to the bed and carefully, so carefully, climbed up beside her father. Nikolai wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, and Amara watched them both cry. Sophia with relief, Nikolai with something that looked like grief and hope tangled together. I'm sorry, little star, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry you had to be scared. It's okay, Papa. Miss Amara stayed with me. She promised you'd come back. Nikolai's eyes found Amara's over his daughter's head, and the gratitude in them was almost unbearable. They stayed like that for an hour. Sophia chattering about everything she'd been holding inside, while Nikolai listened with the patience of someone who'd come very close to never hearing his daughter's voice again. Eventually, she fell asleep curled against his side, exhausted from emotion, her small face peaceful.
"She needs you," Amara said softly. "She needs you healthy and present and not locked behind walls of trauma." "I know." Nikolai stroked Sophia's hair with gentle fingers. "That night in the alley, when I met you, I thought I was protecting you by walking away, by keeping you out of this world. But all I did was prove I was already broken beyond repair. You're not broken. You're wounded. There's a difference." "Is there?" He looked at her directly now. "I've killed people, Amara, not in self-defense, not in the heat of battle. I've given orders that ended lives because it was necessary for business. I've done things you can't even imagine."
"You're right. I can't imagine. But I know who you were when you kissed me in that alley. And I know who you were when you played with Sophia in the kitchen making pancakes. And I know who you were when you risked everything to expose Maxim, even though it might have gotten us both killed." She leaned forward. "You're not the sum of your worst decisions. You're also the sum of your best ones. And you get to choose which ones define you going forward. And if I choose to walk away from all of this, if I choose normal and boring and safe, then I choose that with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nikolai's throat worked, his eyes searching hers. "I don't deserve you." "Good thing it's not about deserving." Amara smiled slightly. "It's about choosing. And I'm choosing you. The question is whether you're finally brave enough to choose me back." "I chose you 5 years ago," Nikolai said, his voice rough. "I've been choosing you every day since, even when I was too afraid to act on it. That napkin with your phone number. I kept it behind glass in my study. Looked at it every single day. Reminded myself that somewhere in the world, there was a woman who'd looked at me like I was human instead of a weapon. Then stop punishing us both for decisions you made when you were 22 and terrified." Amara reached out, cupping his face gently. "Start making new ones now." He turned his head, kissing her palm, and when he looked at her again, something had shifted in his expression. The walls were still there, the trauma and the grief, and the weight of everything he'd done and survived. But there was also something else now. Something that looked like hope. "When I get out of here," he said slowly, "when the legal mess is sorted and Sophia is settled and we're not living in crisis mode anymore, Sutto, ask me again. Give me a chance to answer properly, without bullets and blood and people trying to kill us." "That's a lot of conditions."
"I want to do this right. I want to court you properly. Take you to dinner without checking for snipers. Buy you flowers that aren't funeral arrangements. Make you laugh without wondering if happiness is something I'm allowed to feel." He smiled faintly. "I want to be the man you thought I was in that alley, or at least someone close to him. I'll hold you to that."
"Good." Sophia stirred between them, mumbling something in her sleep. Nikolai adjusted his arm around her carefully, wincing at the pull on his stitches, but not letting go. "She's going to need stability," he said quietly. "Therapy, probably. A normal school. Friends whose parents aren't connected to organized crime. Everything I can't give her right now, but will move heaven and earth to provide." "We'll figure it out," Amara said. "Together." "Together." He tested the word like it was foreign. "I've been alone so long I'm not sure I remember how that works." "Then it's a good thing you've got time to learn." The months that followed were brutal in their own way. Federal prosecutors descended on the Volkov organization with the enthusiasm of people who'd been waiting years for this opportunity. Nikolai cooperated fully, providing evidence, testifying in closed hearings, watching his father's empire systematically dismantled. Viktor Morozov took a plea deal and disappeared into witness protection. The remaining underbosses either fled or were arrested. Assets were frozen, then liquidated, then distributed to pay restitution to victims of Volkov crimes dating back decades. Nikolai moved out of the estate into a modest brownstone in Brooklyn. Still nice, still expensive by normal standards, but nothing like the fortress he'd inhabited. No armed guards, no panic rooms, just a house with a yard where Sophia could play and neighbors who thought he was a widowed businessman recovering from a difficult period. Amara officially moved in 3 months after he was released from the hospital, her belongings fitting into a single room that Sophia immediately claimed as the guest room where Miss Amara keeps her stuff. She went back to work at the hospice, helping terminal patients die with dignity while Nikolai attended physical therapy and worked with Irina to rebuild something legitimate from the ruins of his family legacy. Therapy was mandatory for both of them, separately and together. Nikolai needed to process 5 years of manipulation and the trauma of his parents' murder. Amara needed to work through the fact that she'd killed 2 people, no matter how justified. Some days were harder than others. Some nights Nikolai woke up screaming, trapped in nightmares where Maxime was still alive and still controlling him. Some mornings Amara couldn't look at her hands without seeing blood. But they were learning to be human together, learning that healing wasn't linear, learning that love in the aftermath of violence looked different than love in the rain-soaked perfection of a first kiss. It looked like Nikolai making coffee exactly the way Amara liked it. Like Amara sitting up with him during nightmares without trying to fix them, just being present. Like Sophia gradually losing her fear of sudden noises and learning to be a regular kid. Like Sunday mornings making pancakes and Thursday nights watching movies, and the slow, painful process of building a life that didn't revolve around survival. 6 months after Maxime's death, Nikolai took Amara to dinner at a quiet restaurant in Manhattan. No bodyguards. No checking exits. Just the 2 of them in normal clothes, eating normal food, like normal people who hadn't watched each other kill to survive. Over dessert, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm ready now," he said. "To answer properly." Amar's heart stuttered. "I didn't ask you a question." "You did. 6 months ago in the hospital, you said I needed to be brave enough to choose you back." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, setting it on the table between them. "So here's my answer." The ring inside was simple. A single diamond on a white gold band, elegant and understated. Nothing ostentatious. Nothing that screamed money or power or the empire he'd left behind. "I'm not asking you to marry a crime boss," Nikolai said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I'm not even asking you to marry the man I was 5 years ago. I'm asking you to marry the person I'm becoming, someone who makes pancakes on Sunday and helps with homework and goes to parent-teacher conferences. Someone boring and safe and desperately in love with you." Amara felt tears sliding down her face. "That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. I know, I'm terrible at this." "It's also perfect." She said yes. They married 3 months later in the backyard of the Brooklyn brownstone, surrounded by the small circle of people who actually mattered. Helen cried through the entire ceremony. Irina served as witness, her usual severity cracking just enough to reveal genuine happiness. Sophia was flower girl, taking her duties with adorable seriousness, scattering petals with careful precision. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a city clerk who had no idea about the violence and chaos that had brought them to this moment. The vows were traditional, but when Nikolai said, "for better or worse," his voice broke, and Amara knew he was thinking about all the worse they'd already survived. The reception was pizza and champagne and paper lanterns strung across the yard. No formal seating, no speeches, just people eating and laughing and celebrating the fact that somehow, against all odds, 2 people who'd met in a rain-soaked alley had found their way back to each other. As the sun set and Sophia fell asleep in Helen's lap, and the lanterns glowed against the darkening sky, Nikolai pulled Amara into a slow dance on the grass, their bodies swaying to music playing from someone's phone. "I never thought I'd get this," he said quietly. "A real wedding, a real marriage, a normal life." "Nothing about us is normal," Amara pointed out. "Fair enough." He smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time in years. "But it's ours, and that's better than normal." They danced until the music stopped and the guests began leaving, and Sophia needed to be carried to bed. Then they stood together in the yard, surrounded by the detritus of celebration, holding hands in the darkness. "You know what I realized," Nikolai said. "That night in the alley, when I walked away from you, I thought I was saving your life. But really, I was just prolonging both our suffering, because we were always going to find our way back to each other. All I did was waste 5 years. We survived those 5 years, both of us. And maybe we needed them to become people who could actually make this work. Always seeing the positive. One of us has to." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Besides, we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." A year later, they stood in front of Vivian's grave, the marble headstone weathered slightly by seasons but still pristine.
Amara placed wildflowers beside it, while Nikolai stood with his hand on Sophia's shoulder, the three of them forming their own small family unit. "Aunt Vivian would be happy," Sophia said, "that you and Papa got married. She told me once that Papa needed someone brave to love him properly." "Your aunt was a smart woman," Amara agreed.
Nikolai knelt down beside the grave, pulling something from his pocket, the cocktail napkin, now permanently encased in a small frame. He propped it against the headstone. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. "Just took me longer than it should have." They stood there for a while. Three people marked by loss but held together by love, saying goodbye to the woman who'd orchestrated their reunion from her deathbed. Then Sophia tugged on Amara's hand. "Can we go get ice cream?" Papa promised. "Did he now?" "I absolutely did," Nikolai confirmed, standing and taking Amara's other hand. "Chocolate with sprinkles. You're spoiling her. That's my job." They walked back to the car, Sophia between them, chattering about school and her friends and whether they could get a dog. Just a normal family on a normal afternoon, doing normal things. But as Nikolai loaded Sophia into her car seat and Amara slid into the passenger seat, their eyes met across the interior of the car, and she saw everything they'd survived reflected back at her. The violence, the grief, the impossible choices and the blood they'd spilled and the future they'd almost lost. And she saw something else too. Gratitude. For the rainy alley. For the kiss that started everything. For the 5 years that had torn them apart and the 3 weeks that had nearly killed them and the months of healing that had brought them to this moment. Nikolai reached across the console and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Ready?" he asked. It was such a simple question, but after everything they'd survived, after all the times they'd been ready for violence or loss or inner endings, being ready for something as mundane as ice cream with their daughter felt like a victory. "Yeah," Amara said, smiling. "I'm ready." He pulled out of the cemetery parking lot, and as the car merged into afternoon traffic, Amara looked back one last time at Vivian's grave, at the flowers and the framed napkin and the marble that marked where a friend had died so 2 other people could finally learn how to live. "Thank you," she thought, "for everything." Then she turned forward, toward the life waiting for them in Brooklyn, toward the ice cream shop and the homework help and the bedtime stories and all the beautiful, ordinary moments that came after survival. They'd started in chaos, a kiss in the rain, a phone call that changed everything, 5 years of silence broken by fate, and a dying woman's intervention. But they were ending in peace, hard-won, blood-bought, absolutely worth every scar. And as they drove through the city with Sophia singing off-key in the back seat and the sun turning the buildings gold, Nikolai looked at Amara and mouthed 3 words he'd tried to say in the hospital but hadn't been able to finish. "I love you." She mouthed them back, and this time, when he squeezed her hand, neither of them let go. Because they'd already lost each other once. They weren't making that mistake again, not in this lifetime, not ever.